Have you ever had your heart shattered so deeply that you wondered if you'd ever feel whole again? Adele did. Behind every soul-shaking note, behind every Grammy, every sold-out show, was a woman sitting alone in a room, crying over a love she thought would last forever. She didn't just lose someone, she lost herself. But instead of breaking in silence, she turned her pain into poetry. She sang her sorrow so honestly that millions found their own stories inside her voice. This isn't just the story of a singer. It's the story of rising after ruin, of daring to be vulnerable in a world that rewards masks. This is the story of how Adele turned heartbreak into history, why her voice continues to heal hearts across the world. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear might just help you find your own voice too. In a quiet corner of Tottenham, London, a young girl named Adele Laurie Blue Adkins grew up in a small flat with her mother, Penny. Raised by the strength and tenderness of a mother determined to give her daughter anything but limitations. Adele's childhood was not cushioned by glamour or privilege, but it resonated with emotion. She learned early that life would ask more than it would give, yet she found solace in music. When she was only 3 years old, she discovered Billie Holiday and Etta James on her mother's record player, mesmerized by the raw vulnerability in their voices. In the dim living room of their modest home, Adele found her first sanctuary, a world shaped by song, not by circumstances. As she grew, that sanctuary became a lifeline. Teenage Tottenham was both inspiration and challenge. Friends taunted her weight and teased her ambition. School days moved slowly, colored by insecurity and longing for something more. Yet, while others were chasing trivial trends, Adele was studying emotion how a phrase could break your heart or lift your spirit. At 14, she wrote her first song, not for fame or applause, but because she had lived something too heavy to keep inside. She described heartbreak in lines she barely understood, but in singing them, she made them lighter. Music became her confession and her repair kit. At age 16, Adele performed in Soho's small performing arts schools. And her voice broke through more than just noise. It reached into the room and unsettled people. Here was no polished diva. She was still raw, still breathing in every note. Her stories weren't rehearsed. She sang about longing, loss, loneliness, feeling deeper than most adults ever dared. Record executives noticed not just the timbre of her tone, but the tremor of her truth. And when she stepped onto stage at the Brit School, signing for a record label, people wondered what made this ordinary-looking girl feel so extraordinary. It was her authenticity, the way she sang with heartbreak already woven into every breath. But life for Adele didn't suddenly soften with opportunity. She still missed her friends, her island escapes, and late-night conversations with her mother. She still felt the pang of teenage longing and the fear that her voice might vanish in bright lights. She battled self-doubt, worrying she wouldn't live up to her own sound. Because, for Adele, music wasn't a craft, it was a confession. When she sang, she stayed exposed. Yet song after song, she found herself wearing vulnerability with more confidence than most wear armor. She gave voice to sorrow, and in return, sorrow softened beneath her chords. When her debut album, 19, dropped, critics praised her maturity beyond her years. Listeners connected to her as if she had sung their own stories. It felt less like a record and more like speaking one's truth in the dark and someone across the room finally listening. And even as Adele stepped into success, she stayed grounded. She didn't chase Twitter trends or fashion fame. She didn't let cameras chase her. She let her music speak. Behind every powerful chorus was a girl who still missed home, who still feared imperfection, who still knew heartbreak could always find her. In these early years, Adele learned that fame wasn't freedom, but it was opportunity to speak honestly and deeply, to turn the quiet ache in Tottenham into loss shared by millions. She recognized that her voice was not just a privilege, it was a burden of truth, and she carried it carefully. Even as she walked toward global stardom, her heart remained tethered to that small flat in London, to the woman who taught her to sing through tears, and to the belief that emotional honesty could shine brighter than any spotlight. So before Adele let the world hear her heartbreak, she first let herself feel it. She gave voice to her pain. She let music be her witness, and in doing so, she discovered a universal chord, the truth that in songs we heal together. There comes a moment in everyone's life when what you believed forever is stripped away, and suddenly the world feels quieter, empty until heartbreak fills its echo. For Adele, that moment arrived like a storm gathering slowly, and then roaring into everything she thought she understood. After the tentative hope and applause of 19, she had believed love was finally in reach. That the music had been the prelude, and eventual warmth might follow. But the relationship she trusted, unlike her lyrics, did not hold forever. The messages became sparse, the calls silenced, and the connection disappeared without explanation. Where she once felt safety, she found emptiness. Where intimacy once existed, now there was only the hollow between words unsaid. That heartbreak shook her not as headline drama, but as raw, personal devastation. The kind that makes you doubt your own voice, your own worth. Yet from that rupture, from the residue of longing and loss, Adele created a new kind of song. She didn't flee the pain, she leaned into it. She turned away from every advice line urging her to move on quickly, and instead, she walked through the lingering ink with her pen, her piano, her shedding tears. In the quiet of her soul, she began writing what would become 21, not as a commercial venture, but as an emotional exorcism. She set aside the notion that heartbreak must be silent. Instead, she invited it in, sat across from it, and spoke about it in lyrics that had no filters, no shields, just raw emotion laid bare. She wrote about the betrayal, the loneliness, the longing for closure, and the ache of wanting both to forget and to understand. She painted each line with honesty so vivid it felt like confession, and with each verse, she reclaimed pieces of herself shattered by love lost. When songs like Someone Like You poured out of her, they carried the echo of silent hotel rooms, whispered apologies that never materialized, mornings spent staring at a phone that didn't ring. The melody became a lullaby for anyone who had ever expected love and been disappointed. And yet, it wasn't just grief, it was reclamation. She produced tracks like Rolling in the Deep that thundered with classical soul fury, speaking not just of loss, but of strength found in forgiveness. Adele's heartbreak did not weaken her, refine her voice, deepened her conviction, and made her invite millions to feel alongside her rather than apart from her. As 21 dominated the charts, analysts hailed Adele as an emotional powerhouse. Critics marveled at how she translated personal pain into universal feeling, noting that her songs transcended borders, cultures, ages, uniting people in grief and catharsis. Stadiums sold out, not because people wanted to hear music, but because they needed to hear honesty. There were concerts where entire audiences sobbed, voices trembling in candlelight vigils of sentiment and shared solace. Tears streaked across phone screens, capturing lines once written in solitude. Adele had taught the world that heartbreak is not a dead end, it's a shared heartbeat. But for all its acclaim, the creative process was still deeply painful. To record the album, she invited heartbreak into the studio. She had to relive every moment of heartbreak each time she laid down vocals, as though reliving trauma in stereo. Often, after sessions, she would slip away backstage or into a trailer, wiping mascara from her eyes, exhausted by the emotional demands of performing emotion. Artists' groupies might not have seen it, but Adele saw it. She lived it. She cried it. And still, she stood on stage night after night, channeling heartbreak into power, softness into resonance, and pain into poetry. The paradox of her experience lay in the fact that a woman who felt so broken had suddenly created something people called Unbreakable. Fans pleaded for tickets. Critics raved over the craftsmanship. Media called her voice a force of nature, even though she insisted she was still a girl from Tottenham who simply cried into her notebook. She refused to forget where she came from, and while fame and awards filled her shelf, her heart remained tethered to vulnerability. She didn't polish her story into Instagram gloss or celebrity narrative. Instead, she honored what made her real grief: doubt, fear, and used it like pigment in her palette. As she rose, so did her humility. Interviews revealed her nervousness in early performances, her insecurity about being on camera, her fear that every lyric replayed a wound. Still, each time she opened her mouth to perform, she converted pain into art. She taught that heartbreak needn't hide behind perfection or PR spin. Instead, she used it to break down walls, to build empathy, to forge connection. In the years that followed, Adele didn't dash away from her past pain. Instead, she leaned into evolution, even as 21 became timeless. She recognized her voice could deepen with life's next chapter: motherhood, fame, divorce, siege, breakup, providing more lines to write, more heartache to sculpt into song. She carried forward the lesson she had learned, that vulnerability, once embraced rather than avoided, remains potent long past any heartbreak's end. It becomes wisdom. Adele's heartbreak-shaped artistry became an anthem for healing. Her fans didn't just listen to her music, they carried it with them into hospital rooms, relationship struggles, quiet car rides. They told stories of crying into her lyrics during breakups, or finally forgiving after heartbreak because she had sung forgiveness first. They didn't cheer for a performer. They thanked a kindred spirit who felt their pain and found a song for it. Through it all, Adele never lost sight that true authenticity came at the cost of being exposed. She remained grounded, refusing scripted celebrity, valuing honesty over image. At award shows, she walked with tears in her eyes, yet lifted trophies for the same songs that had cut her heart. In private, she still mourned what was lost. In public, she turned it into art that celebrated survival. She taught that making peace with pain doesn't mean forgetting it, means integrating it. It becomes part of the music, part of the meaning, part of the message. This segment of Adele's life was not about despair, nor was it about melodramatic rebound. It was about transformation, about learning that the things you think break you can, in fact, be the things that build you if you allow the broken pieces to become your craft. She didn't just survive heartbreak, she made it sing. She didn't just bear her scars, she brandished them. And in doing so, she created not simply an album, but a conduit for human healing. So now, if you're listening and you've been burned by love, if you've grieved someone who disappeared, or if you feel too fragile to be hurt, know that your hurt can become your art if you let it. Let Adele's story remind you that when heartbreak is expressed with courage and honesty, it stops being humiliation and starts being medicine, starts being connection, it starts being legacy. In 21, Adele didn't just tell her story, she offered a mirror in which millions found themselves, found solace, found they weren't alone. And that is the power in heartbreak that is felt, not hidden, honored, and ultimately transformed into something timeless. There's a sacred alchemy in Adele's story, the way she managed to alchemize heartbreak into gold, turning the most painful chapters of her life into the most triumphant moments of her career. As 21 swept charts and awards, Adele stood at a crossroads. She could rest on its staggering success or step forward into an even deeper evolution of self and art. Rather than bask in the glory of victory, she chose introspection. She chose growth. She chose renewal, and thus began her emotional rise, not from fame, but from authenticity. In the aftermath of 21, Adele retreated for a moment into silence, not as defeat, but as recalibration. While the world assumed she was crafting her next big move, she instead started living life in its simplest form. She dove into motherhood, welcoming her son, Angelo. She found sanctuary in his presence, in cuddles, in late-night lullabies. She rediscovered laughter and private joy away from the glare of cameras and critics. And yet, motherhood didn't mean muting her voice, meant deepening it. It meant layering vulnerability with wisdom, sadness with serenity. It taught her that true art doesn't always roar, sometimes whispers. When Adele unveiled 25, the world watched with anticipation. She had not succumbed to pressure to conform. She had taken her time, honoring the emotional work she was doing. And what emerged was an album both familiar and transformed, bearing her signature heartbreak, yet shaped by perspective. Songs like Hello echoed with longing, but also with accountability. Themes of regret, redemption, and reflection made it clear she had not just loved and lost, but grown. The voice that once wept at 21 now spoke at 25 with both power and pause, demanding we listen not only to her pain, but to her healing. Adele returned to the stage with grace, her voice matured yet equally vulnerable. Each performance was electric, not because it was monumental, but because it was honest. She sang not to fill the silence, but to validate it. She had learned the sacred difference between showing up and being present, between performing and revealing. She still wore her pain, but now it felt like texture woven into melody, tempered by meaning, softened by the wisdom that time brings. Awards followed, Grammys, global recognition, records broke once again. But each accolade rang hollow if she lost touch with the soul that birthed her journey. So she kept writing. She kept feeling. She kept stepping back when needed and stepping into the light when her voice felt ready. And with each album cycle, 30 especially, she wrote from a place of hard-won clarity. That record came after divorce, after motherhood, after global fame. In it was not just heartbreak, but healing, forgiveness, and fierce self-love. Her comeback wasn't about returning with more hits, it was about returning true. She refused to let her narrative be dictated by tabloids or trends. When critics questioned her weight, her style, her vulnerability, she simply reclaimed her narrative through music. She refused to shrink to fit expectations. She refused to compromise her truth. Instead, she used it to connect more deeply. She made vulnerability feel credible again. She showed millions that the most brilliant light can emerge from the deepest darkness, but only if you let yourself shine through it. Behind the scenes, Adele carried the lessons she learned from heartbreak. Never rush grief. Honor your pace, and don't let applause replace inner peace. When she returned to touring after years away, she demanded rest days, vocal breaks. Boundaries, a reminder that performance doesn't come at the expense of peace. She nurtured her voice as tenderly as her son. She sought balance, not burnout, and in doing so, she modeled a new blueprint for fame, not as spectacle, but as service. The world's response to Adele's comeback was overwhelming, not just because she was talented, but because she was human. Fans championed her honesty. Critics learned that vulnerability sells not if packaged in cheap theatrics, but if spoken in a voice soaked in truth. She sold out stadiums, not with spectacle, but with solitude-laced songs everyone cried to. She did it on her terms. And what she left behind each night wasn't just performance. Her journey also shifted culture. She reminded performers, athletes, creators, that career breaks aren't career kills. That motherhood is not invisibility. That heartbreak may injure you, but it needn't define you. Instead, it can deepen your empathy, sharpen your art, expand your voice. She wore her scars like medals, not to command pity, but to inspire possibility. Her evolution from 19 to 30 sounded like healing, redemption, evolution. It sounded like someone who learned bravery daily. Every farewell made public, every comeback announced, was not a hustle, it was a healed heartbeat made louder. She urged her audience, listen with patience, mourn with courage, heal with time, because she had lived it. She had watched the applause swell, then silence flatten, and ultimately, she composed a sound that echoed not across continents, but within hearts. As her world tour closed with lights dimming, Crowds roaring, voices united in her choruses. Adele didn't stand triumphant. She stood transformed, not from the medals on her wall, but from the courage in her chest, not from the contracts signed, but from the pain reclaimed. Her comeback story wasn't a defiance, it was a declaration. I will sing through sorrow. I will create through chaos. I will rise through regret. And with that, she didn't just reclaim her own voice, she gave others a reason to keep theirs. She showed that true triumph is not always built on the stage, but in the steps taken alone across empty rooms. That fame can be fleeting, but truth can endure. That the best comebacks are not mere returns, but resurrection of self. So, if you've ever doubted yourself in quiet nights, if you've ever wondered whether heartbreak will forever define your story, know that Adele stood there too. And she came back not by bearing her pain, but by letting it speak. Not by chasing cheers, but by trusting the silence. She came back through compassion for herself and others. As well, she came back through honesty. She came back through evolution, because sometimes greatness is not built by hitting the same note, but by finding new ones, structured by resilience, tempered by self-love, and sung with renewed vulnerability. This was Adele's comeback hand through it. She taught us all the real power of rising again. There are moments in life when your world quietly crumbles, not in public spectacle, but in silent heartbreaks, in private moments when no one is watching, when tears fall without sound, when your reflection becomes unfamiliar and your voice seems too small to matter. For Adele, that space between heartbreak and healing became sacred ground, not just for personal recovery, but for creative rebirth. And in those moments of profound vulnerability, a universal truth began to rise, that when we honor our truth with honesty, we do not weaken our power, we magnify it. Adele didn't choose vulnerability because it was fashionable. She chose it because it was the only thing left when everything else had failed. The love she believed in had slipped through her fingers. Her sense of self had been shaken. And the easiest thing would have been to build walls, to protect her heart with silence, to hide her pain behind performance. But she didn't. She sat with her grief. She opened her notebook, pressed record, and invited us into the most intimate spaces of her story. And in doing so, she unearthed something deeper than music. She created connection. The lesson was never about perfection. It was about presence. Adele's cracked voice, her tear-soaked ballads, her unfiltered interviews, these weren't acts of pity. They were acts of power. 'Cause in a world that constantly tells women, artists, and dreamers to be polished, to be resilient without showing pain, she chose to be real. She let her flaws breathe. She gave grief a melody. She allowed heartbreak to be holy. And in that choice, millions found their own pain mirrored and dignified. We live in a world addicted to curation, where social media demands highlights, not honesty, where feelings are filtered, where vulnerability is edited to fit algorithms. But Adele shattered that cycle. She didn't chase virality, she chased truth. She didn't manufacture emotion, she honored it. Her songs weren't built for the charts, they were built for the soul. And that's why they endured. That's why strangers cried in her concerts. That's why fans said her voice helped them through divorce, death, depression. She gave her ache a sound, and that sound became healing for others. What Adele taught us is that true artistry isn't about escape, it's about expression. It's an expression that dares to be raw, that dares to say, this hurts, and I'm still here. Carries with it a kind of courage the world desperately needs. She reminded us that being broken doesn't mean being ruined. It means being real. It means being reborn. 'Cause every time Adele shared her story through lyrics, interviews, or just a quiet look of knowing, she gave permission for others to share theirs. Authentic vulnerability isn't weakness. It's resilience in motion. When Adele sang, sometimes it lasts in love, but sometimes it hurts instead. She wasn't just closing a song, she was opening a conversation about loss, about longing, about the dignity of letting go. She gave shape to the feelings we don't always have words for, okay? And in doing so, she proved that personal heartbreak, when expressed with honesty, becomes more than pain, it becomes art. The lesson goes beyond music. It touches every dreamer, every creator, every human being who's ever been told to hide their wounds. Adele didn't need to become someone else to be successful. She didn't compromise her message. She didn't reshape her story to fit a brand. She embraced her journey, all of it. The silence, the crying in the bathroom, the failed calls, the self-doubt, the triumph, the timation. And through that radical self-acceptance, she became not only a global icon, but a mirror in which millions saw their own humanity reflected. There's a quiet revolution in that kind of truth, in allowing heartbreak to live alongside beauty, in showing that creativity is not about masking our flaws, but about molding them into something meaningful. Adele didn't just teach us how to survive heartbreak, she taught us how to elevate it, to turn it into poetry, to build bridges from pain, to let our tears tell stories that matter. In every chorus, in every pause between lyrics, in every note she held too long because the emotion gripped her throat, she was saying, "You are not alone." And that's the greatest lesson of all. It's that in this fast-paced world where people are desperate to feel seen, the most powerful thing you can offer isn't perfection, it's presence. Real, messy, unfiltered presence. Adele gave us that, time and time again. And the world didn't just applaud her voice, leaned in closer to her truth. So, if you're watching this right now, and you've been hurt by someone, by something, by life, know this: your pain is not the end of your story. It is the ink, the instrument, the raw material of your next masterpiece. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to silence it. Like Adele, you can hold it up to the light and say, "This broke me, and I'm still here. I'm still singing." You can create from your cracks. You can lead with your scars. You can offer the world something deeper than strength. You can offer its sincerity. Because here's the truth, Adele showed us again and again, what is most personal is often most universal. What feels too raw to say is exactly what the world needs to hear. And when you show up, not as a version of yourself, but as your whole self, you give others permission to do the same. So dare to be vulnerable. Dare to speak. Dare to create. Dare to rise. Because one voicinist, aching and alive, can change the world. Just ask Adele. If Adele's story touched your heart today, if it reminded you that even in your darkest moments, you have the power to rise, to heal, and to inspire, then don't let this message end here. You, too, have a voice. You, too, have a story worth telling. Whether it's whispered in a journal, sung in the shower, or shared on a stage, your truth has the power to connect, to comfort, and to create change. And that's what this channel is all about. Here, we don't just talk about success, we uncover the heartbreaks, the hard nights, the human struggles behind it. We celebrate stories that remind us we're not alone. So, if you believe that real stories matter, stories of resilience, redemption, and rising from the ashes, then join us. Like this video if Adele's journey moved you. Comment below and tell us, what's your story? What lesson did you take away from hers? And don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. We have more powerful stories coming your way. Stories that will inspire you to turn your own pain into purpose. This channel is for the dreamers, for the broken, for the brave. And we'd be honored to have you as part of this journey. Until next time, keep rising, keep feeling, keep singing your truth. Subscribe now. Your story starts here.